Good evening and a warm welcome to this special webinar being hosted by the National Kidney Federation and the National Black, Asian, Mixed Race and Minority Ethnic Transplant Alliance, with the support of NHS Blood and Transplant. As a parliamentarian, I've been keen to support the cause of organ donation because of the disproportionate impact on the lives of ethnic minorities across the UK. In fact, the current pandemic has highlighted a number of health inequalities which adversely impact these communities, especially the higher incidence of diabetes, heart disease, and kidney failure. The good news is that the change in law to an opt-out system rather than opt-in, which became effective on the 20th of May last year, brings new hope to those waiting for an organ transplant and will increasingly save lives. Today's first anniversary provides a timely opportunity to take stock of how the change in law has made an early impact, and also provides a chance to discuss future strategy and community engagement. But before we dive into the rich content from our excellent lineup of speakers, I would like to express our collective thanks to all NHS staff, especially those working in renal departments and the entire team at NHSBT for their amazing work over the last year. We know how tough and frankly grueling it has been. Dialysis patients have been particularly hard hit. However, organ donations have still continued, even though at a much reduced rate, thanks to our fantastic NHS professionals. I don't want to steal the thunder of our speakers, but the results of the first year of change are encouraging. We now need to recover from the backlog and ensure that the ambitions agreed in Parliament for an increase in donors and transplants are met in the coming years. Before introducing our first speaker, let me quickly outline the agenda for this evening, which is set out on the slide which should be appearing on your screens. We'll be hearing from Dr. Dale Gardner, the National Clinical Lead for Organ Donation at NHSBT, who will give us a comprehensive stocktake of the first year. We then have Bonnie, a specialist nurse, who will provide some reflections from the front line, after which Alex Cullen will review the opt-out campaign and its impact. This will be followed by a panel discussion led by Kirit Modi, with our lineup of speakers and other eminent experts. And we will end with a special surprise, definitely not to be missed. So please do stay for the whole session. Just some housekeeping points on the next slide. During the webinar, please do post any questions through the Q&A button rather than the chat box. And please be aware that this webinar is being recorded. So to begin, it's my great pleasure to introduce Millie Banerjee, the chair of NHSBT. Millie has been a wonderful partner and great supporter, and she will make some opening comments. Millie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lord Gadhia. I'm so proud to be here this afternoon to celebrate the anniversary of the law change. It was amazing last year that the law change actually came in the middle of the pandemic. I don't mind admitting, and I've said this to many of you before, I was very, very nervous of that happening. And it was, am I being heard? Yeah, okay. And I was very nervous that we could pull it off. But as you've said, Lord Gadhia, the amazing dedication of all the NHS staff, both in NHSBT and in the hospitals, managed to keep transplantation going. And we were all very, very grateful for that happening, not least, of course, the people who were waiting. But it's also amazing what you continued to do, you as a group, because you didn't blink. You just carried on promoting organ donation through numerous events, some of which you very kindly invited me to, and I was delighted to be part of, where you continued to push the line. And you've been very successful. We are getting there. There's no doubt about it. It was an enormous event. I mean, I came here 3-4 years ago, and I was amazed that we actually managed to get that law passed, because at the beginning, you know, there was some doubts about it. But we will continue with the campaign to encourage people. And there's what we've learned also is the sort of conversations that we need to continue to have in order to ensure that people are encouraged. So as Lord Gadhia said, you know, we did manage to keep it going. So in the last year, that is from May to April of this year, in England, we had 1,259 donors and just over 3,000 transplants. But the sad news is, you know, over 5,000 people are still on the list. So we have absolutely no doubt that we all need to carry on with the effort and if possible, you know, even increase the effort. So a couple of last points before I finish is many of you have worked very closely with us in developing our strategy. And we are very grateful for your input. And the strategy is, when it does get published, you will see is a very rich document. The final publication has been held up due to the elections and the pandemic and then the elections, but it's imminent. So I can't say very much about the detail of it. But what I think you will see is we put a lot of emphasis in organ utilization. So we're going to work even more closely than across the NHS, across the whole of the NHS, to make sure that organs that are so generously donated are properly evaluated for utilization. We're also going to focus on the way the whole pathway is organised, and NHS England have very kindly agreed to lead and help us on that. So we have a lot of plans on how we push forward. I think the most important point about this is a strategy that we think will is not just comprehensive, but is pretty much future-proof in that it will last the time ahead of us. So it talks about the need, it talks about the potential for use of technology, it talks about good practice. So all of this has come from your input and others that we've consulted. So we feel confident that the strategy will bear us through the next few years. When the strategy gets published, our teams will talk you through it so that you can get a comprehensive view, but we just need to wait a little bit before it does get published. So I'll end by echoing Lord Gadhia's thought about thanking everybody, particularly thanking this group of people, because without you, we would not be able to reach out into the communities. One of the things we've learned from the pandemic is how important that channel of communication is. We at NHSBT always knew that. That's why we've got stakeholders like yourselves. But with the health inequalities and the issues that come to light as a result of the pandemic, we know how sensitively we need to talk about individual communities and to develop our conversations, taking account of their concerns, their barriers, and their wish to understand more what happens in the process. Those are things that we had taken into account in both our communication and in the way we work with you. So we will continue to work with you, and we hope to keep achieving more than we've even done in the past. So thank you very much for listening to me. I'm now going to hand over to Dale Gardner, who's going to talk about some of the detail. Dale.
Thank you very much, Millie. Lord Gadhia, National Kidney Federation, NBTA. It is absolutely my great pleasure to speak to you tonight and really just reflect on what 1 year looks like since we implemented opt-out. Next slide. To begin, I thought it'd be helpful just, and I am risking technology here, but let me just show you a little video just to get us in the mood to reflect on the journey that we have all been through. And it's been a difficult task, as Millie just told us, but we're really excited. So you can watch a whole session that goes for quite a while on the YouTube NHS channel if you want, but this is just a short trailer montage. Next slide, take it away.
everyone to talk to each other, what decision will it be? Let your organs go to waste or save a few people's lives?
We were all focused on one shared objective, which was to save lives and to secure more organs available for donation.
I have to notify the House, in accordance with the Royal Assent Act 1967, that Her Majesty the Queen has signified her royal assent to the following acts. Organ Donation Deemed Consent Act,
talk about organ donation.
Someone else may speak for you.
Great. And our next slide. 1 year on, it's been an incredible path. And we can just sort of pause and let's see that trailer and see all the steps, all the collaboration. But, you know, special shout out today we have to give to Max and Kira and their families, without whom this law I don't think would have come through. Without Kira, Max would still not be alive, and he's a young man growing up because of the donation from Kira's family. And Max and his family, all the efforts they did to promote this law change, to really personify the cause, it cannot be underestimated. Sometimes as human beings, we need that personal connection to really make a difference. Next slide. I've often said, and I think you'd all agree on this call, that organ donation is one of the greatest gifts one person can give another. Next slide. But I think it's wrong for us not to actually also acknowledge it's also the most complicated process across the NHS that we ever do in any 24-hour period. And I want to highlight that to you because I want you to see where deemed consent and organ donation fits into this. Next slide. So the path towards donation and transplantation sadly begins with a sudden and unexpected medical emergency requiring mechanical ventilation on someone in the community. That person is moved to intensive care. And while they're on intensive care, doctors like me, as an intensive care doctor, come to the very sad conclusion that death has occurred or it's inevitable. And so you've got into this mix a grieving family, and then doctors like me and nurses like Bonnie, who you'll hear soon, will speak to families, and out of the midst of their grief, incredibly, they'll look beyond themselves and say that so but powerful word of yes. And at that moment, and only there with a yes, does the preparation for organ offering start. Next slide. And as part of that offering, we need to begin with checking that there's no objection from Her Majesty's Coroner or Procurator Fiscal. And then we begin a UK-wide offering and matching. And out of that offering those organs as a national resource across the UK, sometimes even internationally, if no organs are accepted, we get that yes from a transplant, yes for a potential recipient. And then we mobilise the National Organ Retrieval Service. And we're quite unique in the UK for having a system like that. So then we have potential organ recipients anywhere in the UK being phoned, being texted, saying, come in, there might be a gift of life today. And from the donor hospital, organs will be moved to wherever in the UK they need to go. And that's where the gift of life begins. And classic story of Phil Hardwell, who received a heart transplant right in the midst of the COVID pandemic, which was just an amazing sign of generosity from the family and also from the teams involved. Next slide. We've got our legislation here in England, as we talked about, but we need to see it in the picture of the whole UK. Wales, as you saw in that montage video, led the way. Jersey's been involved. English law changed and commenced on the 20th of May, our anniversary today. But Scotland actually went live 26th of March, only a few short months away. And so there is progress being made across the UK. Next slide. I wanted to share some data with you, but not to overwhelm you. This is actually the organ donor register data up to the end of April. And you'll see in the UK that 43% of the UK population have given their registered decision regarding organ donation, either opt-in or opt-out. And I think that's very, very impressive that so many people, but we'd love that to be much higher because we'd like to know what people want. But if we look at opt-out, Wales, which has had opt-out much longer, is at 6% of the population have opted out. England is running around 3%, but seems relatively stable at that. Both nations seem relatively stable. That's actually very good numbers. Some other nations, particularly, say, the Netherlands, which has introducing, they're running much higher, well over 20% of the population have opted out. So I think that's a very sort of reassuring that the UK population supports organ donation and transplantation. Next slide. So just to remind us as we go through today, what actually does the law say? Well, under the new law, all adults in England are considered as having agreed to donate their own organs and tissues when they die, unless they've recorded a decision not to donate, which can be either written or verbally expressed to their family, or in one of these excluded groups, which I'm displaying there, which essentially includes those under the age of 18, not lived in England for more than 12 calendar months, or wouldn't have the mental capacity to understand the law. So next slide. What we have in the UK is often referred to as a soft opt-out. And what that means is that families must be consulted and family objection will be respected. That's what it means to have a soft opt-out, and that's what we have in England. Next slide. So at our 1 year anniversary, what data can we share with you? Well, 296 people in England have had their consent deemed since the law went live 1 year ago today. And that's accounting for 29% of all donations. So there are three sort of ways the consent can be gained. One is a first person consent. And what that means is that someone's either said to their families they would want to donate or they've registered, and that runs at 92%, which is very, very high. Our deemed consent rate is running at 66%. And the other consent, where we don't know what the person would have wanted, they have never spoken and they don't meet a deemed consent criteria, as I've outlined before, it runs at 52%. Now that used to be the same for all other consents that weren't first person. It literally was a flick of the coin, 50-50, with the family say yes or no. And deemed consent is helping families have that conversation, and that's raising first person consent, but also reassuring families that it is okay to support donation because this is a societal good that helps and saves lives. Next slide. I'll highlight there that our overall consent rate at the moment in the UK is 68%. Unfortunately, that hasn't shifted from the year before, and some might find that disappointing 1 year on, but I don't. I don't at all. I'm very sanguine with that number because I see the journey is only just beginning. Next slide. We learned very clearly in Wales when they introduced opt-out that it took up to 3 years to make a difference, and we published those results, but it did make a difference. And you can see some of those numbers of the consent rate, how dramatically it improved for Wales, and how they increased the number of donors per million population. And when they reached 30 donors per million population, that put them at world-leading, world-class levels. Why did it work in Wales? Well, greater public confidence, greater clinical confidence in the doctors and nurses who are talking to families. That's a culture change in society, a culture change in our hospitals. They don't change overnight. They can't be changed with just a pen and a paper. They take effort like what we're doing tonight in communicating with the public and sharing our stories and working with our clinical teams as well. So Wales did it, and I have no doubt England will see those similar numbers rising. We're only at the beginning stages. Next slide. And in case you didn't notice, in case of not what planet you were on, there's also been a very, very difficult year I mean, I had to grow my hair really long, as you can see in that photo, for a start. So it's been a very challenging year. And that's a picture of me on the intensive care in those pictures. Nothing has been normal about this year, which is another reason why I think our consent rate to have been maintained in the midst of a pandemic is fantastic. Next slide. Because what you will see here on the left is this used to be what it was in intensive care when I'm working. A grieving family could come in every day, or even sitting next to their loved one. They could be there in the ups and downs of intensive care. And then people would talk to them with regular meetings in an interview room with the family, updating them, communicating. And now, because of COVID, it's speaking to families on the phone, trying to achieve that sort of personal relationship just by a phone conversation, with our waiting rooms, our interview rooms empty, because families can't come in. But when they do come in, it's often for that final day, that final end of life discussion. There's been no ability to have a lead in, build a relationship. It's incredibly hard for families. Really, I take my hat off to the families for how well they've coped with their phone calls and how patient they've been with the staff on the intensive care. Next slide. COVID has impacted this year. For a start, COVID positive patients, they could not donate. So because we might pass on COVID to the recipient. Our own workforce in NHS Blood and Transplant, our nurses, actually delivered nearly 17,000 hours of frontline nursing care to help support the intensive care units during the first wave, with also providing bereavement care and convalescent plasma and blood donation work. We had to use a lot of our resources into that area. The transplant workforce itself, theatre staff who would normally be helping with transplants, were redirected to help save people on the intensive care. Even some transplant surgeons had to be redeployed to intensive care in London. Transplant centres had to open and had to close because of just the difficulty, the fear of infecting the recipients, the keeping their staff to actually run the service. But even though the whole year we've been through has been about understanding risk and managing fear, the foundations for donation and transplantation in this country are very strong, and that's what we're going to leap off. Next slide. I look at the consent rate that's happened over our time, and you can see how it fluctuates. But I will draw your attention to this quite interesting phenomenon that in the worst months of the pandemic, both our first and big second waves, it's in that moment that we had some of our highest consent rates through the entire 2 years that are displayed there. And I think there's something about the solidarity that came and clapping for the NHS and trust in the NHS, which shows that our foundations for the future are strong, and people and the trust in society for the NHS is something we can build on. Next slide. Not even if we forget the numbers, for us in our trying to support of NHS blood and transplant, donation and transplantation, the benefits of collaboration have been incredible. It has transformed the way we as an organisation work, which have transformed the way we communicate donation and transplantation, with the parliamentary support, with the patient group support that we've got very much tonight by National Kidney Federation, NBTA, with ethics, organisational, media, regulators, faith groups. It's been incredible. Next slide. Particularly, I would highlight our engagement with the faith communities. It was because of that engagement that came because the law was introduced. It wouldn't have happened otherwise. The faith groups so much came and interacted with us, and we could listen and we could change. And now the NHS Organ Donor Register has been altered to allow people to record a faith declaration to ensure that faith and beliefs are not forgotten. Not that I was worried they would be, but they can be reassured that they are always there and always remembered at the end of life. Next slide. So what's next? Where do we go from here? Well, we've done some of the UK and some of our sort of other Crown dependencies, but Guernsey and Isle of Man are very close to sort of bringing their own opt-out legislation in. Northern Ireland has begun a public consultation, and they're hoping to submit a draft bill into the Assembly. There's a very exciting moment happening next year, and that's the 2022 Birmingham Commonwealth Games. And this is a fantastic opportunity for the world to come together and for us to share our experience. And what we are doing in NHS Blood and Transplant is leading trying to get a Tribute to Life project to start a memorandum of understanding where we can share expertise and knowledge across the Commonwealth regarding donation and transplantation. And through a lot of hard work by some of the members on this call tonight, 35 out of 54 Commonwealth nations have joined that, and we'll be able to share some of our learning and learn from others overseas simultaneously. It's a great opportunity, and Birmingham 2022 it will be great for the UK and great for the West Midlands. Next slide. Really then it comes for me to close to say 1 year on, it's been an incredible journey. Max and Kira's Law, our thanks particularly to them and their families, but a wider thank you to all of you who have continued to promote donation and transplantation in the midst of this pandemic, all of you who are clinical, who have worked with families, both on the donation side and the transplant side. And if there are any donor families and recipients here, a huge thank you to you, because without you, that's what we do it for. So I'll stop there, but thank you. It's been the hardest year of my career in intensive care and donation and transplantation. But out of that, I think we've built something really tremendous. So I'll leave it there. And now I'm going to hand over to someone who is tremendous. And Bonnie is actually going to talk to us about what it's really like to be a frontline specialist nurse, a specialist requester who has these conversations with families. Over to you, Bonnie.
Hi, thank you everyone for letting me share my experiences with you as a specialist nurse who approaches families. Can everyone hear me? As a specialist nurse who approaches families of potential organ donors who meet the deemed criteria. Next slide, please. Dale has already covered the media coverage of the legislation change, so I'm not going to bore you with that information, but there was a wide coverage to raise awareness so that people could make decisions about their end-of-life care, including organ donation. Thank you. And next slide, please. So who does deemed consent apply to? So it applies to all adults who die in England and are ordinarily resident in England at least 12 months prior to their death. So the law assumes that these adults will be seen as willing to donate their organs unless they opt out. But at the same time, the law recognizes that it cannot be applied to everyone. So there are exceptions, as you can see from the slide. For example, children under the age of 18, people who lack the mental capacity to understand the arrangements and take necessary action, for example, by opting out of the organ donor register or telling their loved ones that they would not want to donate, and people that are not ordinarily resident in England, for example, visitors, asylum seekers, or people that are in prison, or if a donation decision has been made. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this slide actually shows that every opportunity for organ donation is explored. Even where the exclusions are, we would approach the person of the highest ranking authority to seek consent for organ donation, because every donor, every organ is precious. So we do not miss any potential organ donors. So we would approach every family where there's a potential for organ donation. Next slide, please. So the aim of this legislation was to encourage people to talk more about organ donation, to understand that it is their choice and it is still a gift. And once they have made these choices, to speak about their choices with their loved ones. And this was hoped that it would relieve families of the burden of making a decision where a decision by a loved one is unknown at the time of their death. So in practice, the message that we are trying to get to families is that it is really helpful and important to speak to your loved ones about your end-of-life decisions, including organ donation. Next slide, please. So as Dale covered before, the implementation of the legislation change and SNOT's training coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic. So we did hit some hurdles along the way. And that meant that SNOTs were reassigned. For example, I had to work on the bereavement line, and that in itself was eye-opening, showed me how much COVID had actually affected so many people, because we were only like looking at patients in hospital, but through the bereavement line, I was able to see how much the community, the families of those that were lost during the pandemic were affected. So that also was something that we did as SNOTs during the pandemic. So the actual implementation of the legislation was phased when the lockdown was over, and it went live region by region. So in the northern region, we went live in September 2020. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of the approaches that I did between September and December 2020. And in the next slide, I'm going to share my experiences about how the legislation change affected or was reflected in the way I approached the families. Next slide, please. So the emphasis now is on the last non-decision. So before we go in with the family, we try and work out whether someone meets the deemed consent, but sometimes what would appear as though someone is actually deemable, when you actually go in and speak to the family, you realize that the patient had made a decision, and a verbal decision weighs as much as a written decision does. For example, you go in and speak to the family and they tell you that their loved one made a decision not to donate. So we need to establish early on with the family whether someone had made that decision or not. So we need to know more about the patient now than we ever did before. And to help us do this, we now start with something that we call MASH, which looks at not only the medical history, but the social and travel history of the individual. That way we get to know whether the person has been in prison or whether they've had mental health issues, and all those questions and answers would help us to establish whether someone meets the deemed criteria or not. But I've also realized while talking to families that people are still not talking about end-of-life decisions with their loved ones. There are many times when we go in and the family is still unsure because they've never ever spoken about it. And the impact of an unknown decision to a family at the time when they are losing a loved one or they've lost a loved one can be quite distressing, because sometimes people are not sure and they're scared of making a decision that they're not comfortable with. Whereas if a decision is known, families are able to have these conversations and support the decision of their loved one. There is an awareness of the legislation change. Some families bring up organ donation and they would say that it's because they saw something on the telly or on the bus or in the newspaper and they were able to talk about it with their family members. Whereas there are still some families that would say that they've never heard of the legislation change, the deemed consent. So we still need to do some work in getting this information out. I've also realized that family values play a major role in influencing decisions for and against deemed consent. Those family members that have had a positive experience about organ donation would most likely support a donation, whether it's deemed or not, whereas there are some families that just don't believe in organ donation and would not support it because it's their family values. In situations where someone has opted out, and if it's appropriate, would still explore with the family. This is not to coerce the family to change their decision, but we do so that we improve our practice. And sometimes the decisions for opt-out turn out to be based on incorrect information. So we take that opportunity to make sure that we give out the correct information, with the hope that in future, when the same family is asked to consider organ donation, they make the right decision based on the right information. Next slide, please. Donation conversations with the family have not changed significantly as a result of the legislation change. We still practice in a way that is reflective of the NHSBT values of caring, expect, and quality. So when we go in to speak to families, we don't go in with the law in front of us and our caring nature and humanity as nurses behind. We make sure that the conversations are conducted in a sensitive way, with kindness and empathy, because we are mindful that we are ambassadors of the organization. And the last thing that we need to do is to make a difficult and sad situation for a family worse. So we try and make sure that every family that we talk to has a positive experience with donation, whether they support deemed consent or not. It's just to make sure that we deal with them as humans, people dealing with people. But like before, the family is always consulted, but with deemed consent, the decision rests with the individual rather than what the family would have wanted. So I always bring the conversation back to the patient and say, what do you think your loved one would have said in a situation like that? Do you think they would have wanted to save other people rather than asking the family to make a decision? It's asking them to support a decision. So the language has changed as well. And we also have videos that are in different languages like Polish and other languages for those families whose first language is not the English language. We still need to expand and have more videos in different other languages, because at the moment we just have minimal languages covered by those videos. The law is permissive rather than mandatory. So in a situation where the family is not comfortable supporting deemed consent for valid reasons, their reasons are actually respected. Next slide, please. The reasons for declines are familiar to us, and they range from families not being comfortable to support deemed consent because they never ever spoke about it with their loved ones, to religious and cultural reasons. For example, I had a family, it was a traveling family, and as soon as I mentioned organ donation, and the person of a highest ranking relationship just told me to stop because they don't believe in organ donation. And some reasons for decline are based on myths and misconceptions. For example, one family said to me they would not consent because they know would be taking their relative to theatre over a week's period and taking one organ at a time. Once that misconception was cleared with them, they were happy to support organ donation, and it did go ahead. There's also extended family members and friends that influence the person who is meant to make a decision, for example, a spouse of a patient. But although I've not approached many BAME families, because in Newcastle, the BAME community only in Northeast, the BAME community only makes about 6% of the total population. I'll speak more from a personal perspective. With me, for example, if I were to make a decision regarding organ donation for my loved one here in the UK, I still need to talk to my family back home, because for me, a family is not just me and my children. It includes my mom, my dad, my brother. So the whole extended family needs to be informed, and their decisions, their views are taken into account. So with BAME, and I would say I won't speak for everyone, but I would want to think more, from what I know, we need more time, because most of us have families back home that we need to talk to. So after futility conversations, maybe we need to take a break and ask people if they need to speak to other people outside the UK before we actually broach donation, and so that their individual concerns are taken into consideration. Next slide, please. So there are many challenges that I seem to come across in approaching families and raising awareness. But for me, really, what stands out is that you are most likely to get a no for organ donation from a BAME family, and yet we have the highest number of people in the transplant waiting list, and we have the highest number of people dying whilst waiting for an organ. And BAME patients are most likely to wait more than 6 months for a kidney transplant. So we need to start talking more about organ donation within the BAME community. And I feel the best way is to engage the community leaders who have the ears of the BAME community. Those are the people who can reach out to the BAME community. And we need to diversify our workforce so that it's reflective of the diverse society that the UK is. And I have attended some BAME sessions for organ donations within Newcastle, and their challenges are mainly resources. One group said that they actually use their time, they use their financial resources to do what they do. And I feel like we need to have maybe some funding for these groups so that they can do what they do, because it's amazing. And we need to reach out to the BAME community because we really need organs from there as well. And so I feel like even though the numbers, the chances of getting consent from BAME are slim, we should not give up. We should keep going one step at a time and change the narrative. Thank you very much. Any questions? I'm going to hand over to Alex next.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. That was great. And there's nothing more powerful than hearing that account of what really happens when it comes down to it. Those conversations that Bonnie's having day in, day out, they're the crunch moment, and everything that me and my team are doing is to hopefully try and make that conversation as smooth and as comfortable as possible for the family by making sure that as many people as possible have engaged with organ donation prior to that kind of unexpected situation. I've called my section "The Journey to Opt Out and Beyond" because for us, in terms of how we engage the public, the law has obviously been a really significant part of what we do, but actually we're looking ahead now and thinking, how can we use that as a springboard and make sure we've got a really clear and engaging way to get the public behind this. Next slide, please. So as you've heard from Bonnie and Dale, and I'm sure many of you with lived experience of donation and transplantation, it's a complicated set of both circumstances and processes. And so for us as a communications team to really engage the public, we've had to really simplify our messaging and really make sure that we're focusing on what is it that people need to know. And so as such, we've gone at a 3-stage approach to embed the law and ensure we've got a really strong legacy coming out of it. The first half really focused on awareness, driving education, and then what came out in our research was so important that people still have a choice. This is a legislation change, but personal individual choice is still fundamental to it. And that what we found was really important to ensure that public were accepting and positive about the law change. And that was a key learning, particularly from our colleagues in Wales who've been such forerunners in this, implementing this legislation 5 years ago. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that post-law change, really, where have we been in the last 12 months and what's got us to where we are today. Next slide, please. So the overarching objective that we had was to ensure that we had awareness of the law. Because this is a deemed situation, we need to ensure that the public have really had that opportunity to be aware of what the legislation implications are for them as individuals. And so our key target was to get to awareness of 75%, and that was from a starting point of 46% at March last year. So we had a very clear set of goals to go after, engaging all adults over the age of 16, as Dale's alluded to, in terms of the criteria for where deemed consent is applied. England only, because of the separate legislations applied in the other nations and jurisdictions. And then, as Bonnie's alluded to, with a really specific focus to ensure that we were adapting and tailoring our message to Black African, Black Caribbean, and the whole spectrum of South Asian communities, where we see the waiting list times are so significantly longer from a kidney perspective, and where we know there is so much more engagement to do to harness that level of support. Next slide, please. As we've already referenced, the media are phenomenally supportive of organ donation. I've worked on lots of different causes and different brands. I've never known anything like organ donation in terms of its power to get column inches in national media, local media, TV, all sorts. And what is really central to that coverage, actually, it comes down to the power of someone standing up and sharing their lived experience, that personal testimonial of what organ donation and transplantation meant to them. There is just nothing more powerful as a story for people just to like. I can't come across a single kind of instance where it hasn't stopped me in my tracks. Every single example is so unique and so specific and so thought provoking. And that for us, in terms of engaging the public, is our biggest weapon to ensure that we engage as many people as possible. Next slide, please. And as I alluded to, we've got so much work in terms of engaging specific communities. There are lots of things that have fed into our campaign this year, whether it's been local community print and relevant case studies and telling their story in different radio and print titles, whether it's been our PR activity, whether it's been our outreach with faith leaders and different community groups. I think the real cornerstone of our activity here actually comes back to our community investment scheme. So we're now into our third year of funding grassroots organisations, each passionate about organ donation in their respective community, and each doing what they do best, which is tell the story from their perspective, engaging the people that they know, and making it so deeply personally relevant to them. So a real spectrum of projects that we've had the good fortune to fund and collaborate with in recent years, and that is a constant source of inspiration and is constantly helping us push the message out there further. The most important thing here, I think, is trust. Dale alluded to the wider context that we're operating in at the moment, the fact that health inequalities have never been more pertinent in so many ways. And I think the really important area for us here is that we earn our trust. End-of-life care is such a sensitive topic, and we have to make sure we really partner with people who've got trust and are going to help us tell our message in the most accessible and empowering way possible. Next slide, please. So we reached a really exciting milestone. I said 75% awareness was our key target, and we achieved that in December through a whole host of, whether it was TV, out of home, radio, PR, and all of that community work that we've been doing at a grassroots level. So 75% awareness against a backdrop of just an unprecedented news agenda is something, as Millie said, there were no guarantees at the beginning of the year, and we were delighted to reach that milestone. And for us, what that's meant is looking now into 2021 and beyond, is that we're at this really exciting point where we just need to now really establish the point that people need to share their decision. They need to talk to their loved ones so that uncertainty is taken away. And so for us, this has really been a new chapter for us as we come into this year. Next slide, please. We've done a lot of research about this. There were lots of different ways that we could have approached this. And our research has really highlighted that having three kind of parallel focus areas are what's going to combine to help people be able to share their decision. And that's that combination of motivation for why they should talk about it, the opportunity or the prompt to talk about it now, just do it, don't wait, do it now. And then also the confidence. So we found that no surprises, talking about a sudden end of life situation is something that people don't generally want to front into in a family conversation. So giving people that confidence to have that conversation without repercussions is also really important. So to take those in turn, motivation to talk. As I said earlier, there's nothing more powerful than lived experience, and so that was exactly what really focused the work that we did on our new TV advert, telling the real life story of Shivam, his memories of his father, and that very real situation that they were in where they didn't know what he wanted. That family was so generous in terms of sharing all of their family albums. We've got a wonderful insight into their family life, and it was just such a powerful way for us to really put the whole public, put the nation into those shoes and just think, what would I do if I was in that situation? Would I know what my loved ones want? And so reinforcing that messaging is going to be a really important continuation of our work, both from our February-March campaign earlier this year, but also taking it forward into the future. The second pillar about opportunity to talk, this is really about making organ donation more accessible for people, and particularly young people. We see a real kind of difference in attitudes where people are younger and perhaps feel like they're going to live forever. And so we really need to find more surprising ways to engage with that demographic. And so there's an example here of some work we did with the social media platform Snapchat. They developed an interactive lens that you can see there, scans the body, shows the different organs, and was there as a conversation starter, there literally to get people talking about organ donation, and that message about talking to their family really embedded at the heart of that. So we'll be looking to do more of that kind of interactive new kind of formats in the future. And then finally, confidence. And this is where we particularly have seen the need to really unpack I suppose, giving people the tools to start the conversation. And actually what we've seen in our research is did you know that there's a new law, and did you know your family will always be involved? It's a fantastic conversation starter for people. So really ensuring that we're embedding that and giving people that prompt that here's the way that you start the conversation, and that it can flow from there. But we've seen also we need to give really specific support as well for the various minority ethnic communities that I've touched on, where we know there are really specific and bespoke concerns and misconceptions about organ donation, that we need to give people the space to unpack. So there's a screen grab here of a recent YouTube mini-series that we've created with a number of different social media influencers. So this is Big Zoo, a grime artist and also a TV chef, talking about organ donation whilst making some jollof rice with his friends, and talking about the very legitimate concerns they have of how does this fit with being a Muslim? Is that okay? What does that mean? And just having that very open, honest conversation. It's so important for us here to be authentic and allow those reservations to surface, but also be addressed and openly respected wherever people come to their decisions. So that's our formula for success that we're going to be taking forward. I've got one particular area I wanted to share a little bit more on. Next slide, please. And that's really a kind of a new model that we found for engaging audiences. So this is a partnership activity that we ran earlier this year with the ethnic food brand Tropical Sun. We were absolutely blown away by the level of support Tropical Sun gave us. And we ran bespoke messaging across 25,000 packs of their rice, engaging both Black and South Asian audiences with really specific messaging around both blood and organ donation. And for us, this has been such a powerful way to start a conversation. It's led to all sorts of celebrity tie-ups and local councillor, local mayor support as well. But most powerfully, and the message there, it's probably a little bit too small to read on the right hand side. This is a message on social media that came up in response to some of this content, saying we've all seen the WhatsApp messages. We all know that we probably wouldn't donate, but I would be the first one to say if my friend or my family needed to wait longer for a new kidney. So you've opened my eyes, and so I'm going to be changing my preferences, and I will be making sure that I do donate. And for us, that's been just such a powerful example of where we've found the right partner, and they've given us this incredible platform for people to have their conversations and really kind of understand the need that sits behind it, and just what a powerful gift organ donation can be. So yeah, we're really excited about the future that holds for us. Next slide, please. So talking about looking ahead, we've got some really exciting things on the horizon, and I think for us that was the most important thing coming out of the law change, that it wasn't just a flash and that we'd disappear. We've got so much more to engage the public with. One is the really exciting piece that organ donation is on the national curriculum alongside blood and stem cell donation, and that runs across all secondary schools. So we've got some really exciting work plans to make sure we can really celebrate that in schools this Organ Donation Week, particularly given how disrupted the school agenda has been over the last year. There's so much that we can do to really celebrate that. Likewise, the third year of the Community Investment Scheme, we've got 35 projects that we're funding this year with all sorts of new ideas coming to the table, and again, really excited to take those on to the next level. We'll be continuing our Leave Them Certain campaign, really emphasising your loved ones will always be involved, and that's why you need to talk to them about it. And then, as Dale alluded to, Birmingham 22, what an exciting platform, a global platform for organ donation to have, and for us to really continue the conversation at that scale. So we're really excited about what the last 12 months has given us, but just as excited about what the next 12 months hold ahead in store. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to Lord Gadhia.
Thank you, Alex. We now move on to a panel discussion chaired by Kirit Modi, the Honorary President of NKF and NBTA. Kirit is a positive force of nature who I've got to know over the last few years. He's been a wonderful partner to collaborate with and a real professional. As a donor recipient himself, He is totally dedicated to the cause of expanding opportunities for life-saving organ donation for others. Kirit is joined by our previous 3 speakers, Dale, Bonnie, and Alex, and 2 additional experts who we will introduce. As a reminder, your questions can be posted through the Q&A button. Kirit, the floor, or should I say, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Lord Gadhia. We're going to group the discussion into four groups. The first one is looking at the England context, the wider context. So can I start by asking Dale? Dale, I was just wondering, we've had a very challenging year, as you very clearly explained in your presentation. If I were to ask you, what do you think the new year is going to be like for us?
Well, Kirit, that's a really great question. I must reflect that last year I kept saying to my family there'd be no second wave, and there was, and there'd be no further lockdowns, and there was. So it's really difficult for us. I think what we learned last year is we can't really predict. But if you think in terms of donation and transplantation, we've never had a better communication and a better community with our engagement with our stakeholders, but also as a clinical team. We've had to come together like nothing else. And technology that we're using right now has actually made the nation and the world closer together. So even though people are putting up travel barriers, these barriers are breaking down. So I'm quite excited about the new year. I think we're going to do things better than we have before, and we're going to be more focused in on the job at hand.
Thank you. Let me turn to a local context and invite Adnan. Adnan, could you share your experience of deemed consent at your hospital?
Thanks, Kirit. So obviously, deemed consent is it's something which our kind of specialist nurses for organ donation colleagues will be involved with a lot more. I mean, the one thing we've done, certainly from a kidney perspective, is to kind of ensure that that conversation is happening. So all of our kidney patients, making sure that awareness is being raised and being spread around. The other thing also we're trying to do is to ensure that we don't lose the message with regards to living donation. And I think that's an important thing as we do talk about deemed consent. And obviously, that's it's very, very valuable, not just for kidney transplantation, which is my bias. I'm a kidney specialist, but all the other organs. But certainly, live donation is still a very valuable source of transplantation, especially for people living with kidney failure. So I think it's really just our local level. We know our local population, and obviously, in Birmingham, we've got a large minority ethnic community. And there are lots of resources out there, and I think that's the important thing as we talk about deemed consent. People may still have religious obstacles, but there are lots of resources out there. Certainly with regards to, say, the Muslim community, which is very large in Birmingham, the work that NHSBT has done, launching the new fatwa, is just raising awareness of those issues and make sure that people get signposted to the right information.
Okay, thank you. So do you feel, Adnan, more confident because you particularly highlighted the challenges amongst the BAME communities, and there have been obviously lots of other issues which have affected BAME communities during this pandemic. So is it going to be more difficult, or how will we cope with organ donation in these more difficult circumstances we find ourselves in?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, my views on opt-out, I guess, are familiar to some people, and I've always kind of felt that opt-out itself, it was never the magic answer, and I think that's the important thing. That opt-out legislation alone is not the only answer. It's helpful, it's useful, and I think it's given certainly for those conversations is provided a bit more structure, and I think perhaps a change in kind of language and more positive language, but it's not the answer by itself. And certainly if you look at the opt-out register, nearly 75%, if close to 80% of people who have opted out are people from these ethnic minority communities. So I think there's still a lot more that we need to do to try and understand what the issues are, what the barriers are, what the obstacles are. And I think we do just need to keep raising awareness. And I think my main thing would be that, you know, and I think as Alex mentioned, you know, that engagement, that raising awareness, it's not just a one-stop shop. I think it's going to have to be a continuous thing. And I think, yeah, certainly reaching a wider audience, especially schools, I think that's the key thing. But I think that's the main message should be that, you know, we just need to continue raising awareness and use every opportunity to raise awareness, you know, such as the Commonwealth Games, which will be coming here to Birmingham next year.
Okay, thank you. Let me now turn to more specific BAME issues. And Charles, can I invite you? I know you've been doing amazing work with the Black community through the Caribbean and African network, health network, which you've been managing as chief executive. Can you tell us what you've been doing?
Thanks, Kirit. I mean, over the last year, we've been, you know, it's been difficult times, but gently we've been getting the message across. But since the organization was formed about 4 years ago, we've been working closely with NHS Blood and Transplant. And I think, you know, what really encourages us is the active listening and willingness to test out things. So right from the first community investment scheme, you know, we've been part of that. And, you know, some of what we've done around the Precious Lifesavers program, you know, projects that we've run, the flyers were shown earlier on. So what we've been doing is engaging with Caribbean and African church leaders because of the influence we know they wield, but also trying to deal with some of those religious concerns and myths around organ donation. So we've been serving as a bridge, bringing, you know, specialist nurses for organ donation to, you know, the church leaders and, you know, during a summit. And so there was one event we got, you know, about 27 of them to sign a pledge board saying we're not against organ donation. And on the back of that, they invited us and we go into their services on Sundays. We fellowship with them. We're given, you know, a slot to present on organ donation using some scriptural context to it. And then we would have a stall at the back of the church. And after service, we will recruit donors onto the register. And it's gone really well. So even during the difficult times, gently, we've been, you know, pushing out the messaging saying, you know, do not, you know, opt out, because we've had to step up and deal with some of the misinformation on WhatsApp, you know, encouraging people to opt out. And then we've been saying gently, still there will be conversation, although there's presumed consent.
Thank you. But as you know, Charles, you know, the last year has been challenging in lots of ways. And in terms of race equality matters, we all know the disproportionate impact of the virus on BAME communities. We've also had the Black Lives Matter movement. So some people are saying that the trust which some BAME communities have in the system, not just the NHS, but the wider system, has been eroded. Do you think that might affect the discussions you have with Black communities in Manchester?
Certainly, you know, it's been challenging, and obviously across, you know, our ethnic minority communities, a real disappointment with the Sewell report, you know, although we've been encouraged to take some, you know, positives from there. And yes, the trust is very low. But I suppose the approach many of us have taken is saying we need to shape our own destiny. You know, so if we're talking about the long waiting list for Black people, you know, it's not something we can expect government to fix for us. We need to do that. And yes, we've been owning up, saying to people, we know the trust is very low. So, for example, we've been engaging around vaccine uptake way before even the first vaccine was approved because of what we knew people were saying in the community. And yes, you know, resurgence of Black Lives Matter, it really raised emotions and tensions. But I suppose what we've seen is strong community resilience. And one credit to, you know, government once again is getting the faith minister to work closely with the vaccines minister to use places of worship and community centers and get trusted voices and advocate. And some of us have said at many roundtables, including a roundtable with the Prime Minister, that there's lots of learning to be taken from NHS Blood and Transplant and their approach. 3 years down the line from the initial community investment scheme, we can see lots of progress, you know, that have been made. We need to put communities and people, you know, that are trusted in the lead.
Thank you. And I totally agree with you about the community investment scheme, because we're in the third round of that. And I want to ask Alex, really, I think we know that it's very well established. We've got these amazing 35 projects which are currently being funded, as you said. But I want to pick up something which Adnan said. Adnan said that when you break down the data of opting out, yes, in England, yes, after the change in law, that's showing that out of those people who have opted out, nearly 80% are from the AME background, yes, which is obviously a very worrying figure. So I was just thinking, Alex, in terms of how we deal with that and how we use the next stages of the community investment scheme to deal with this. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Kirit. Yes, you're right. The numbers are very stark when we look at opt-outs. I think, you know what, the more that we look at our insights, we see that there's this curve of engagement with organ donation, particularly amongst minority ethnic communities, where almost the first stage is awareness, and there's an element to which you're absolutely right. A large proportion of people have registered their decision that donation is not for them. But for us, that is also the first step on the journey to engagement, because it means that they've actively thought and considered organ donation. And so the subsequent build that we need to make on that is why is it relevant and pertinent to them personally? And I think the most powerful case that we can make is to let the numbers speak for themselves, which is, if you are a Black patient awaiting a kidney transplant, you will currently wait 12 months longer. And that is not okay. And what we see when we put that information out there for people to go, that's a statistic that I can't, the fact is there. And it allows people the space to make their own decision, which is, that's not okay. What would we do to change it? And actually there's an element there to which I can play an active role, and helping kind of empower people to come to that decision is going to be a really important part of our focus. So you're right, the numbers are not okay at the moment, but we need to kind of take that initial level of engagement and really start to unpack that for people. And exactly as you and Charles have alluded to, doing that through people that are trusted, and where that conversation can take place in a safe space, is going to be key for us to really move those numbers on.
Thank you, Alex. That's really a big challenge for all of us, isn't it? I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can see Dale wants to come in actually.
Yes, Dale, do come in.
I just thought on that thing that I can see, if you're thinking about next year, that the champions from the Black and Asian community of 2022 and going on are our donor families who have gone through this experience, our recipients, but also those who have initially opted out, who changed their mind, because they will have to think of it very carefully, and their stories to their own colleagues and community will be probably the most powerful stories, because they'll have had to change their mind, and that's always humbling for anyone if you have to admit you changed your mind, you were wrong about your initial thoughts, something's changed you, why you changed and all that. So I mean, I think I see the numbers as the beginning step, as Alex sees, not as something to be it's our first step, and I think they've engaged enough to actually register. So the next step is to actually sort of hopefully people will change their mind.
No, I think, Dale, I agree. That's a fantastic suggestion. It'd be good to capture, in media through videos and stories, the real examples of people who have changed their minds, so that we can use them as case studies, And so that's something which could be very powerful, people who came with a particular idea and then changed their mind, having had the conversation with the specialist nurse and so on. So that's really helpful. As Lord Gadhia was saying, I'm a very positive person, so we're going to finish on a positive. Now I'm going to ask each of the panelists to think about two things. Something you would personally want to do or plan to do over the next year, which might address some of these issues, and something you hope will happen. So one is something you want to do and something you hope will happen. Okay, Dale, we'll start with you.
So something I will be doing and wanting to do is to actually physically see people again. this is great that we can all come together so easily, but actually it's those quiet conversations that we're talking about changing, that inspiring people, that are often the most powerful. And something that I hope will happen is I really hope that our foundations are strong and we will just build on this. And what we will see is just that actually we're building a house here, and we're laying the foundations, and the house is coming up, and the next stage will be some walls, and we're heading there, and we're building something great. So thank you all, and thank you for the invitation tonight.
I know, that's great. Okay, Alex?
Thank you, Kirit. Something I'm really excited about that I know is going to happen is our community engagement leads. So this is an addition for the community investment scheme, and for us this is really partnering with really trusted voices across London, Birmingham and Manchester, who are really going to help us understand at that local level. And I'm really excited about the level of kind of specific geographic understanding that we're going to get from that piece of work. And I think that's going to give us a whole rich kind of load of insight to build on for the future. And my hope is that we really can start to accelerate living donation. Adnan's exactly right. It's such a kind of sleeping giant in terms of the transformative effect that it can have on the waiting list. So we're really excited to give living donation more profile as we come out of the law change.
No, I think I totally agree with you. You know, Alex, how passionate I have been about living donation, and the fact does remain that more people from BAME background are living kidney donors compared to the number of BAME people who are donors after death. So that's a very interesting statistic. We need to build on that. There's a greater interest within BAME communities about living donation. I think the two types of donations, we need to integrate them more at various levels. So I totally agree with you. Adnan, how about you?
So I guess things which I will be doing is we're doing a lot of work to kind of try and raise awareness and try and get kind of some very culturally competent material to try and promote organ donation, but very specifically living donation. And so we're working with communities here in Birmingham, and some of that will link up hopefully with the work that Dale and others are doing with NHSBT for the Commonwealth Games. So I'm really hopeful for that. And I guess my hope is that we can take things to the next level. I think there's a lot of information, there's a lot of misinformation, things that we know, certain barriers that we're aware of, barriers which we may not be aware of. And I'm hoping that, and there's a lot of research now, and I think it's great that there's research interest into how we can try and improve organ donation, and especially the research call that's come out now to try and look at possible behavior change interventions. And I think it'll be great to kind of actually put some meat on the structure and see if we can actually make a real change to try and improve organ donation rates.
Thank you, Adnan. Bonnie, could you share with us something you plan to do and what a hope you have for next year?
I'm hoping to engage more of the African BAME communities, because like in Newcastle, really, I've never seen the African BAME communities that are supportive of organ donation. The ones that I've attended are mainly by the Asian community. So I would like to see a BAME, a Black African, say local organ donation group in Newcastle. I have already identified one person who has received an organ who is African and is really keen to speak on these meetings that I intend to have. But what I would really like to see is organ donation being spoken about, even in nursing school. I did my training here. Not even one day did I hear anyone talk about organ donation. Throughout my 3 years of nursing, I only heard about organ donation when I moved to ITU. So I would like to see us talking about organ donation in nursing schools, in universities. I spoke to my daughter, who was a treasurer of the African Caribbean Society at their university, and I asked them to put a question to the group what they understand by organ donation and deemed consent, and most of them didn't even have a clue. So I would want us to reach out to these young people, change the narrative, catch them young, and if we speak to the children, they will go home and speak to their parents. And I think that would make a difference.
Thank you very much. Really very important to work with young people. And I think we're all beginning to recognize the importance of that, whether it's in schools or outside, within the community. Charles, can I turn to you about your plan and your hope, please?
Well, I think as Alex mentioned, we're delighted to be one of the community engagement leads and obviously working with Citizens UK to harness their skill when it comes to community organizing. So we're really excited and hoping to build on what we do. It's encouraging. We finding people from our community wanting to do, their dissertation on organ donation. So it's great, and we should have more of that, where, so just like Bonnie mentioned, I think it's been, across the country, some church leaders, especially Caribbean African ones, are fully for organ donation. And so Bonnie will be excited to replicate some of the engagement we've done in Greater Manchester and other places, in Newcastle, where we bring, Black church leaders together and say, you can make a real difference. And, even from using the simple scripture, it's more blessed to give than to receive, and starting a whole conversation around that. And yes, we just want to, be a part of the movement and, hoping that we will come to a place as ethnic minority communities where organ donation is no longer a taboo subject, and we, talk about it freely. So we're excited also to be taking part in the Leave Them Setting campaign, where we having a church leader, using the scripture and, a jingle for radio station and a lot of creative stuff. But it's exciting times, and we're delighted to be part of it.
Thank you very much. I've just had in chat that Millie would like to share her plan and hope. So Millie, we're most interested to hear what you want to say.
I just sent you a message, Kirit, to say
yes, I've seen it.
Not part of the panel.
But doesn't matter.
I want to do is to carry on having these personal conversations with friends and family and acquaintances. And what I hope to do is to influence them, at least to the point that they start the conversations with their family. I think one of your panelists did say, and it's a point that can't be made strongly enough, how important it is to have those conversations with your family, and having that face-to-face discussion with people I think is very powerful.
Absolutely.
I think we should all be wanting to do that, Kirit.
Exactly, I totally agree. So I'm going to bring this to a close and say that's been a fascinating discussion, and thank you for sharing your having an open discussion and also highlighting some of the challenges we face. But as we've all said, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. So thank you. I'm going to hand over to Lord Gadhia.
Thank you, Kirit. That really was a great discussion. Now, I mentioned earlier that we had a surprise to conclude this webinar. Before I introduce this item, it may be helpful to provide some background, and in many ways it relates to the parts of the discussion we've just had. Now, we know from experience that it's often challenging to engage people to think about organ donation and have the necessary conversations with their family to relay their wishes. It's therefore important to constantly look for novel ways to communicate our important message. And Alex talked about some of those examples in her presentation. Many participants may know that Kirit Modi and I have been associated with the Jain and Hindu Organ Donation Steering Group since its foundation. Over time, JOD has experimented with new ways to engage different audiences. So for example, last Diwali, we organized an innovative visual arts competition aimed at children and young people. We asked our next generation to depict organ donation and Diwali, and the response was tremendous. We received an outstanding array of entries ranging from traditional Rangoli designs to videos encouraging people to make the ultimate gift of life. It was an honor to chair the judging panel for that competition, and it demonstrated that we could tap into some amazing artistic talent. What we're about to showcase builds on that experience, and it takes it to a whole new level, concentrating on younger people. This project, called Life Beyond Death, Pass It On, has been undertaken by 3 influential Jain organizations, namely Virayatan UK, Srimad Rajchandra Mission Dharampur UK, and Shishukunj, who have been ably advised by Prafulla Shah and guided by Kirit Modi. They commissioned Ragatit to produce a video featuring young, up-and-coming British Asian artists who have recorded a cover version of the Mariah Carey song Hero. This rendition communicates in a powerful way how organ donation can be considered a selfless act of seva or service. We hope you enjoy this video.
If you look inside your heart, you don't have to be afraid of what you are. There's an answer if you reach into your soul. The sorrow that you know will melt away. Your fears aside, and you know you can survive. When you feel like hope is gone, look inside you and be strong, and you finally see the truth.
We hope you did enjoy that video, and it certainly provides an incredibly inspiring way to conclude this evening's webinar. It adds yet another dimension in our drive to persuade ethnic minority communities to discuss their donation decision with loved ones, and ultimately enables more donations to proceed. I know there's already been a request to share the video, and we'll certainly do that afterwards. In wrapping up, I'd like to thank all our speakers this evening for sharing many important insights. A recording of the webinar and an evaluation form will be sent to all participants early next week. We frankly couldn't have implemented the change of law in a more challenging year. Yet despite all the headwinds, we have seen some encouraging results. Based on this early experience, I'm hopeful that we will see substantial further progress in the coming years. To achieve the ambitions agreed by Parliament, it's obviously important that we continue to build effective partnerships, working between health professionals, charities, and BAME community groups. I know that NKF and NBTA are committed to playing their full part in fulfilling that mission, working closely and collaboratively with NHSBT. On that constructive and positive note, thank you all for joining this webinar, and have a very good